Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 91, The Talent Show. Debbie, Rita, and the rest of the band stood on stage. The song they were going to sing today was Bluebird, the theme song from a Japanese anime movie. It was an energetic song which required them all to sing and dance. The four judges in the audience were all quietly waiting for their performance to start. Debbie looked particularly beautiful, and everyone had high expectations for this young girl group, the Dream Chasers. A few purple spotlights focused on the band. Despite having terrible pain in her stomach, Debbie smiled at the audience. Rita turned around and gave a signal that they were ready to start. The conductor's hand was already raised high, and the musicians were set to play. Then, suddenly, a few people thought they could hear barking coming from the back of the venue. Woof, 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 woof. Just as the band was about to start, a man's voice rang out from the audience. "Oh, it's Bluebird. I need to listen properly to this song." In the quiet environment of the auditorium, his voice sounded particularly strident. People in the audience started to ask each other, "Who is it?" "How rude," one spectator exclaimed. Another said, "They're recording the whole show. Now his voice will be on the recording. They're probably going to have to start again." The audience started to whisper to each other. Everyone was looking toward the man. "Wait a moment," the director of the show said as he made a halting gesture toward the band on stage. He walked quickly toward the man. The man who had called out was in his late 20s. He was dressed casually in a white t-shirt, black shorts, trainers, and a baseball cap that sat at an angle on his head. He was not particularly handsome, but his mannerisms exuded the air of someone wealthy. He was with a woman who was stylishly dressed. She wore a light blue shirt tucked into her shorts. Her hair was purplish red, and her skin was white and clear. Even though she wore a pair of large sunglasses that covered half of her face, she was very beautiful. The couple was very confident and did not feel embarrassed that they were drawing attention to themselves in front of so many people. They walked through the audience with their large dog, looking around them with cold eyes and pushing people out of the way. Occasionally, they yelled at someone rudely. The director walked over to the couple with a smile. He said, "Mr. Dempsey, you've arrived. Why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming so that I could have sent someone to pick you up?" Upon seeing the director's reaction and hearing him address the youth as Mr. Dempsey, some of the audience reacted with surprise. One man said, "So he's Lee Dempsey. I heard that he's going out with that supermodel, Angelina Sanders. That beautiful woman next to him must be her." "Isn't this show sponsored by his restaurant chain, the Dahlia Restaurants?" the man's wife asked. He confirmed it. "That's right. We all eat in his restaurants, though we all pay his salary. We would all do well to remember that." By this time, the executive director had approached Lee and his girlfriend. To everyone's horror, their dog suddenly rushed up to the executive director and bit him on the leg. The director screamed and fell to the ground. Lee and Angelina pulled their dog back, laughed, and greeted the director. Angelina said, "Bad boy, Duke," and even pretended to hit the dog a few times. But in reality, she wasn't cross with him at all. They both knew that Lee was an investor in the show, and that the director would want to keep him on his side. They were sure that everyone would see that their dog biting the director had all been a hilarious joke. In the end, it was the director who apologized to them for overreacting. He was desperate not to offend Lee and Angelina. He simply told one of his staff to drive him to the hospital for rabies vaccination and asked the assistant director to take over from him. The four judges stood up and shook hands with Lee, exchanging greetings. Although they were all famous musicians, they still looked up to him. After all, they did rely on Lee to earn money. One of the judges even offered him his seat. Lee told him, "You're too kind, but I grew up listening to your songs. I can never take your seat in the presence of so many of your fans. I'm happy just to sit next to you. After all, you're the best in the world at what you do. The band coming on stage now is pretty good. Are they still singing Bluebird next? I'm a fan of their song Fire Shadow. I feel very lucky to be here. Lee chatted with the 4 judges for a while before finding a seat with Angelina. People around them were commenting on what they saw. One lady said, "That's the real boss, Lee Dempsey." Her friend replied, "It must be so good to be that rich. Did you see that? His dog bit the director, and he didn't even complain. Even the judges are sucking up to him, and they're all celebrities. Why can't we have that kind of life? Stop dreaming, the show's about to begin." With a smile, the assistant director introduced Debbie's band. He said quietly to them, "Dream Chasers, you are particularly lucky because you chose to sing one of Mr. Dempsey's favorite songs. All you have to do is perform to the best of your abilities." Then he looked at the conductor and said, "Get ready. Start." Debbie, who was standing in the middle of the stage, could feel that she was starting to bleed. While this was happening in Chicago, Alex was having lunch in a private room with Joe, Susan, and their friends. They were all enjoying themselves. "Alex, why didn't you bring Debbie along?" Joe and the others knew that Alex and Debbie were together now, although they had no idea that they lived together in Green Island Garden. They thought that they must be renting a cheap room somewhere. "Oh, she went to Chicago a few days ago. Tonight she's taking part in the Sky's the Limit talent competition." Alex couldn't help but wonder if Debbie had already finished her performance, or if she was just nervously waiting for it to begin. "Why didn't you tell us earlier? And why didn't you go and watch her perform?" Joe couldn't believe that Alex hadn't gone to support Debbie. He didn't know that Alex had intended to go and surprise her, but had canceled to celebrate his friend's engagement. Alex replied, "It's all right. We talked about it. She said there was no need for me to go. She said it was more important for me to come out and celebrate with you." Alex smiled and said, "Come on, I'm here now, so let's enjoy ourselves. Let's drink a toast to Joe and Susan." Joe laughed and raised his glass. "Drink," he ordered his friends. On the stage of The Sky's the Limit, the 5 girls were jumping around and singing their hearts out. But with every movement, the pain in Debbie's abdomen intensified. All she wanted to do was to stop the show, cover her stomach, and burst into tears. But she knew that opportunities like this were once in a lifetime. The group had worked so hard to get their place in the contest. If it had only affected her, Debbie might have backed out. But as the whole group would lose out if she left, she was determined to continue no matter how bad the pain became. At last, their performance was coming to the end. The climax of the song was a solo verse for Debbie to sing alone, while the rest of the girls danced. A spotlight appeared on Debbie's head as she sang, "Flapping their wings, they flew high in the sky. I said I wouldn't come back. The goal is the pale white clouds. If you can traverse, I know I can. Enough to find. Swing as much as you can. Take off." Debbie tried to give the best performance she could, but singing required her to breathe deeply, and this made her feel as if her appendix was being squeezed in a vice. All her attention was focused on resisting the pain, and she was barely able to control her voice. Several times her voice quavered. Even the most tone-deaf members of the audience could tell that Debbie's singing was poor. Lee sat down frowning. Debbie reached a crescendo in the song, which required her to take a particularly deep breath. As she breathed in, the pain in her stomach intensified, and her lungs felt like they were being constricted by a python, the pain increasing bit by bit. But she was determined not to give up. With a pale face, she smiled and continued to perform. She was starting to feel very hot. Unaware of Debbie's plight in Chicago, Alex was enjoying himself, drinking with Joe and their friends. He happily picked up a cigarette and joined Ben and the others in cheering and heckling as Joe and Susan kissed. Performing the dance moves, Debbie twisted her waist to the music. Every move she made was a torment to her. It felt as if someone was stabbing her with needles. Bluebird was finally coming to an end. Debbie's vision had become unfocused, and her mind was becoming muddled. She was on the verge of collapse, but she still needed to perform the last few lines of her solo. The other 4 members of the group were dancing around Debbie on stage. Rita saw Debbie's body trembling slightly and gave her a worried look, while Melissa looked on with a sneer. She still hadn't forgiven her for becoming the lead singer. Debbie continued to sing. Flapping my wings and flying high, I said I will not come back. Looking for... It was pure white, the clouds. Debbie's singing became intermittent, and her breathing was raspy. She was even moaning slightly. Debbie had done her best to control her voice throughout the performance, but now she couldn't control it at all. One of the judges commented, "What is this terrible singing?" "We don't even need to give them a score. This segment will definitely be cut out," said another. "I can sing better than that," the first judge agreed. The audience, on the other hand, felt that something must be wrong. They were discussing it among themselves, but they had no idea how much pain Debbie was in. Lee stared angrily at her. Angelina said to him, "Darling, she totally ruined your favorite song. I'm so sorry." Lee didn't say anything, but he sighed heavily. "Duke, don't you think so?" Angelina looked at the dog who was lying on a seat beside her. "Woof, woof, woof, woof." Duke barked a few times. Sensing that a few people near them were losing their patience with them, Duke started growling at them uneasily. When the people backed away, he relaxed. Angelina rubbed his big head and soothed him. "Good boy, my little Dukey." Episode 92, Bluebird. On stage, Debbie continued to sing as well as she could, but she was struggling because of the severe pain in her stomach. Suddenly, the audience noticed that the singing dramatically improved as another person's voice overshadowed Debbie's. "If I can get through, I know I can find, trying to get away from the blue sky. Fly to the blue sky, fly toward the blue sky." The voice was loud, melodious, and full of passion. Melissa had danced over to her singing, and Debbie glanced at her gratefully. She was enduring a great deal of pain and was happy to step back and let her take over. Debbie was sure that she was only trying to help her. Melissa had a good singing voice, but it sounded even better in contrast to Debbie's, which had become so weak. The audience and the judge's eyes lit up with relief, while Lee softly said, "Ah," with a trace of admiration in his eyes. When they had finished the song, the 5 girls gave a bow on stage. Finally, the 5 long minutes were over. The moment the music stopped, Debbie's legs gave way and she fell onto the ground. This caused another commotion in the audience. Rita quickly helped her up, but Melissa, who was standing beside her, only smiled coldly. Watching Debbie's weak appearance from backstage, Janice covered her mouth and started crying. If she had known earlier how sick she was, she would never have let her perform, even if that meant forfeiting the competition. She could only hope that she would be okay. The judges were very concerned about Debbie and told her to go backstage and rest. One of them said to Janice, "Is your singer ill? Hurry up and take her backstage to lie down. As for your score, I'm sorry, but thank you for taking part." The other 3 judges agreed. "Indeed, go back and rest. Your health is more important than the competition," one said. Rita was very disappointed. If Debbie had been well, she was sure that they would have done well in the contest. However, now was not the time to worry about the results. She only wanted to make sure that Debbie received treatment as quickly as possible. The 5 girls bowed and were about to step down from the stage when Janice rushed up to support Debbie. Then Lee spoke up so loudly that everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at him. "Hold on a minute." Lee was very angry. He didn't care how sick Debbie was. He felt that singing Bluebird so badly was an insult. What made him even angrier was that, with so many children around, he couldn't even curse loudly. He muttered to himself, "How dare this group ruin Bluebird for me?" "So, how do you think you did? I'm guessing you already know," Lee said as his gaze shifted between Debbie and the others and finally landed on Melissa. He pointed at her and said, "This girl sang quite well. At least her voice was quite pleasing to the ear. Because of her, I'll let you pass to the next round." Because Lee was a sponsor, his words meant everything. Melissa gasped in surprise. She immediately grinned and thanked Lee. "Thank you so much, Mr. Dempsey. I promise that I'll continue to work hard." "That's enough. You're getting in the way now. Get down from the stage." Lee waved his hand and the girls walked off the stage. Janice stopped Debbie. She said, "Debbie, wait a minute," and quickly dialed 911, telling them that an ambulance was needed urgently to take someone to the hospital. Janice held the weakened Debbie in her arms and comforted her softly. "Don't be afraid, the ambulance will be here soon," she said. Rita also stood beside her, holding her hand and looking at her with concern. "Rita, I'm in so much pain," Debbie told her friend. Her clothes were soaked with blood now. Her eyes were closed tightly and her hands were clenched. She thought she might pass out. Katie was angry with Debbie and huffed at her. "You have a nerve complaining about being in pain. Because of you, we were almost eliminated." Olivia agreed. "That's right," she said. "You said that you didn't have a stomachache yesterday, and you said the same last night. Then at such a crucial moment, you decide that you do have a stomachache after all. I think you did it on purpose." She crossed her arms and looked at Debbie coldly. Hearing her friends criticizing Debbie, Melissa giggled to herself. At that moment, Rita, who usually managed to stay calm, felt that she had to stick up for Debbie. She asked Katie, "You think she wanted this to happen?" Katie replied, "Did we say something wrong? If it wasn't for Melissa saving us in the end, we would have been eliminated. She almost ruined it for all of us. Can you blame us for being mad with her?" Janice interrupted the argument with a frown. She said, "All right, Katie, Melissa, like I said before, you all have to stick together and look after each other. If one of you succeeds, you all do. Have you forgotten what I said? Miss Campbell, please don't be angry. We're just a bit upset. It's not surprising, but I promise we'll all calm down now," Melissa said as she walked over and persuaded Katie and Olivia to sit down. She wanted Janice to see her smoothing things out so that she would have a good impression of her. Debbie spoke up with great difficulty. "Miss Campbell, it's my fault. I'm the one who did wrong. Don't blame them. It's me. I was wrong." Hot tears once again flowed down her cheeks. She looked pitiful. Janice hugged Debbie and tried to comfort her. She said, "No, it's not your fault. Don't say that, and don't worry about anything." The talent show was still going on. Duke, who was lying beside Angelina, stuck out his tongue and started panting. Angelina knew that this meant he was thirsty. "Dukey, are you thirsty?" she said as she touched the dog's big head. Since she didn't want to miss the show, she needed to find someone else to take her dog out to get a drink. Because of Duke's earlier growling, the rest of the audience was keeping their distance. They believed that the dog was aggressive and wasn't going to get anywhere near it. Angelina pointed at a young man and instructed, "You, come here." "Me?" The man that Angelina was pointing to was Charlie Mason. He looked at his friends, but everyone else pretended to be watching the show. He secretly cursed his bad luck and walked toward Angelina with a frown. "Duke, you're not allowed to bark," said Angelina to the dog. When Charlie walked over to them, she pointed at him while looking at the dog and said, "Duke, this young man is going to take you for a drink. Be good and don't bite him." Charlie was scared and embarrassed. He had become a dog babysitter. He didn't dare to take hold of Duke's leash, but he also didn't dare not to. Angelina was Lee Dempsey's girlfriend and was not someone he could afford to offend. In the end, he decided to lead Duke out of the auditorium and to the artificial lake to let him drink water. Thankfully, after listening to Angelina's words, Duke didn't bite him. "Perhaps he likes me?" Charlie wondered. Melissa, who was at the back of the auditorium with Katie, saw Charlie holding Duke and shouted at him, "Darling, why are you holding the dog?" As Charlie led Duke over to Melissa, other spectators screamed when they saw the huge animal approach. In the end, he persuaded Melissa to walk over to him instead. When he saw her frightened expression, he scratched Duke's head with his hand and said, "This is Auntie Melissa. You're not allowed to bite her." Charlie was enjoying looking after Duke, but Melissa was still too scared to get close. She looked warily at the dog and asked Charlie again what he was doing with it. He told her about Angelina telling him to take the dog for a drink. He wants water? Hearing this, Melissa raised her eyebrows and looked at Charlie with a sinister smile. You wait here. She walked to Debbie's side and picked up the bottle of water that was beside her. Debbie, I need water for the dog. Can I use your bottle? Debbie glanced at Melissa weakly and nodded. The corner of Melissa's mouth raised into a smile. With the water bottle in her hand, she walked back to Charlie. Give him this. Melissa threw the water to Charlie. This was given to Debbie to drink just now. Darling, this dog is Angelina's. Aren't you playing with fire? Charlie had just seen how much pain Debbie was in and was suspicious. Melissa wanted Duke to feel the same pain. But if they did something to hurt him, they would have Lee to deal with. He didn't want that. It is indeed playing with fire. But it's not us who'll get the blame because it isn't our bottle of water. Melissa's eyes looked sly. Quick, give it the water. Seeing Duke licking from the bottle, Melissa smiled. She took the bottle with what was left of the water and quietly placed it next to Debbie. Looking at Debbie, who was leaning against Janice with her eyes closed, Melissa sneered. You sad loser, she thought. You have no idea that this is just the beginning of your troubles. Charlie took Duke back to Angelina. 20 minutes later, while Angelina was whispering with Lee, Duke began to whimper. After another 5 minutes, Duke was lying on the ground, moaning and sticking out his tongue. No matter how much Angelina tried to comfort her, he didn't recover. Duke, what's wrong with you? Angelina touched the dog's head with a pained expression and looked at Charlie angrily. You, come over here. What did you give him to drink? Nothing, just water. Charlie looked very scared. Rubbish. He was fine before. Then you took him for a drink and he came back like this. Tell me what happened, Angelina said aggressively. Lee was also glaring at Charlie. Everyone around them was staring. There was so much noise coming from the small group that the director stopped the performance on stage and everyone looked over. I just gave him a drink of water from a bottle. The bottle belonged to one of the singers backstage. Honestly, that's all I gave him, Charlie said, trembling. Garbage. You say you only gave him water from a bottle belonging to someone backstage? Lee stood up and pushed Charlie back a few steps. Take me to get that bottle of water right now. If anything happens to my dog, I'll never forgive you. Of course, Charlie said with a frightened smile. Then he walked in front of Lee with his head lowered. Lee and Angelina walked after him, followed by other members of the audience. A small cart was used to push Duke behind them. When the performers backstage saw Lee arriving, they were all surprised and stood up one by one. Janice and Rita supported Debbie, but just like the others, they didn't know what was happening. You gave your water to my girlfriend, Charlie pointed at Melissa. Mr. Dempsey's dog drank your water and now he's really sick. What? Melissa screamed in fake surprise. She quickly said to Lee, Mr. Dempsey, someone else gave me that bottle of water. It's not my fault. Really? Lee's gaze turned colder. Did you tell that person you were going to give the water to my dog? Yes, I said that the water was for a dog, and you're the only person here with a dog, so she must have known that I meant Duke, Melissa said. Who is this person? Lee asked. Melissa's gaze shifted to Debbie, and she pointed at her. It's her fault. She gave me the water. Episode 93, The Dog's Revenge. It's you again, Lee said angrily when he recognized Debbie. First you ruined my favorite song, now you make my dog sick. Debbie's stomach still hurt. She couldn't even open her eyes. She had no idea what had happened, and Lee's words just confused her. Janice and Rita also had no idea what was going on. They didn't know that Melissa had given the water to Debbie. At that moment the ambulance arrived, flashing red and blue lights. It stopped outside the auditorium, and 2 paramedics lifted a stretcher out of the back. We need to get Debbie to the hospital. We can sort this out later, Janice said as she and Rita went to help Debbie onto the stretcher. Stop, Lee shouted. Did I say you could leave? They all froze. Lee's gaze landed on Melissa. Give the water to the doctor and get them to check if it contains poison. Yes, sir. Melissa picked up the bottle of mineral water and handed it to the paramedic. The paramedic knew who Lee was, so he agreed straight away. He used the equipment in the ambulance to do a quick check on the contents of the bottle. While this was happening, Angelina had asked the other paramedic to treat her beloved dog. He immediately injected Duke with analgesics and anti-inflammatories to stabilize his condition. The first paramedic finished his tests and ran out of the ambulance. He said to Lee, "Mr. Dempsey, the test has shown that there has been poison added to this water. Drinking this water would cause severe abdominal pain." Hearing this, the crowd was in an uproar. Lee glared angrily at Debbie, who opened her eyes in shock. She looked at Melissa, and only then did she realize what had happened. Debbie slowly raised her arm and pointed at Melissa, saying, "It's her, Mr. Dempsey. This bottle of water. She gave it to me." "Bullshit," Melissa said in a fluster. She looked at Lee, afraid that he would believe what Debbie said. She continued, "Mr. Dempsey, she's trying to frame me because she thinks that I reported her to Miss Campbell." Debbie looked at Melissa furiously and said, "Nonsense! It was you!" "Obviously, you drank it yourself to cover up the truth. Don't bother trying to frame me. If you admit the truth to Mr. Dempsey, I'm sure he'll understand and take pity on you." Melissa panicked, but she wasn't afraid. Today, she wanted Debbie to repay the debt that she felt she owed her, and with interest. Lee looked coldly at Debbie. "You must hate me for criticizing your singing, right?" he said. "So you decided to take it out on my dog? You have to understand that I sponsored this competition. I can only have the best singers on stage. Go on, admit what you did." Debbie looked at Lee and shook her head. It wasn't like that. She had no bad feelings toward him. She now knew that Melissa had orchestrated everything. "You destroyed my favorite song and then poisoned my dog. Are you tired of living or something?" Lee's tone became increasingly sinister as he continued, "Stupid girl. If anything happens to my dog, you'd better stay well away from me." At that moment, Angelina walked straight over to Debbie and, without saying anything, she slapped her face twice. Neither Janice nor Rita tried to stop her. "You bitch! How dare you poison my dog? Duke's life is worth 100 times yours. Who do you think you are?" she said fiercely to Debbie. Then she calmly walked back to Lee's side. "How's Duke now?" Lee asked Angelina. "I asked the paramedic to give him painkillers. He's in less pain now than he was before." As Angelina was talking to Lee, the paramedic walked over with Duke and said, "Mr. Dempsey, your dog isn't in pain for the time being, but you need to find a professional veterinarian to have a look at him." "Thank you. We'll see the vet later." Lee bent down and stroked Duke's head. His gaze turned toward Debbie, and he whispered sinisterly to the dog, "Duke, do you know why you were in so much pain earlier? It was because of her. Do you want to take revenge?" Duke seemed to understand Lee's words and bared his teeth at Debbie. "Mr. Dempsey, what are you doing?" Janice and Rita were both terrified. Debbie also opened her eyes wide and looked at Duke. But Lee ignored them. He patted Duke's head and unhooked the leash. Duke ran toward Debbie while growling and baring his teeth. Janice and Rita were terrified and moved away from Debbie's side. Debbie forgot all about the pain in her abdomen. Looking at Duke charging toward her, she got up quickly and tried to run. With every step she took, pain shot through her stomach. She ran full steam into the artificial lake, but Duke rushed in after her. He reached her quickly, baring his teeth and trying to bite her. In order to avoid the attack, Debbie punched the dog's head with all her might, but she was no match for Duke. A piece of her clothing was bitten off by the ferocious dog. While Debbie was being mauled by a crazed dog in Chicago, Alex was getting drunk with his friends in New York. With a flushed face, he raised his glass and clinked it with Joe. "Drink, my friend. You've really found yourself a wonderful wife." Debbie fell into the lake with a splash. She choked as she swallowed a mouthful of water and desperately tried to stand up. Duke bit her arm and she started bleeding. Meanwhile, Alex clinked glasses with his friends. The liquor splashed out, and they all laughed loudly. Alex felt happy. He couldn't remember feeling as content as he did that night. In the artificial lake, the girl and the dog were splashing maniacally. Duke had a lot of energy, but Debbie was already on the verge of exhaustion. Her clothes were torn, her body was bitten, and she was starting to lose a lot of blood. Duke was looking for an opportunity to bite her neck and finish her off. Janice and Rita pleaded with Lee to save Debbie, but it was useless. If Duke killed Debbie, Lee would tell everyone that it was an accident. His reputation wouldn't be affected at all. At that moment, a strident voice came from behind the crowd. "Hey, isn't this meant to be a talent show? Why is there no one on the stage, and why are all of you standing out here?" 4 female performers walked out with the young man. The girls were all elegantly dressed and stunningly attractive. Any one of them could be a supermodel. In contrast, the young man was wearing shades, a baggy t-shirt, and surfer shorts showing off his extremely hairy legs. He looked like he was wearing a pair of woolen pants. Trying to get on Lee's good side, an audience member pointed to the approaching young man and said rudely, "Hey, who are you? How did you get here? Don't you know Mr. Dempsey's here?" The youth glanced at the young man and then told the girls beside him to wait a moment. He casually walked over to him and asked softly, "Were you talking to me?" The young man tried to act tough, but he was still a little nervous. He spluttered, "Yes, Mr. Dempsey's still here. Who do you think you are?" But before he could finish, the youth had already reached over and had hit him 10 times in the mouth. The poor young man's lips were swollen and bleeding. His handsome face was battered and bruised, and he was on the verge of tears. "Mr. Dempsey, he hit me," he complained to Lee in a whine. "Shut up." Not only did Lee not help him, but he actually punched him as well. The poor man was now bleeding from his nose. He was in complete misery. If he had known what was going to happen, he would have never gotten involved. No one could understand what Lee was doing. Why wasn't he kicking out this arrogant newcomer? To their surprise, Lee walked over to him with a fawning smile and said, "Mr. Ambrose, when did you arrive in Chicago? Why didn't you get someone to notify me when you arrived? I would have arranged for someone to pick you up." The audience was dumbfounded. They wondered, who is this Mr. Ambrose that Lee Dempsey's so afraid of? One man muttered to his friend, "Mr. Dempsey's such an important and powerful businessman, and yet he bowed to this slob?" "This Mr. Ambrose must be even more important than Lee Dempsey," agreed his friend. The first man looked at his phone and confirmed, "Yeah, he is. The internet says that this Mr. Ambrose is involved with half of the female celebrities in the entertainment industry. He's worth a fortune." From Lee's reaction to the youth, the onlookers had guessed his identity. The young man was Alex's half-brother, Justin. Since he had never been interested in the family business, no one recognized him. Although Justin was a member of the Ambrose family, his part of the family was far less rich and powerful than Alex's, and his wealth was far inferior. However, he was still one of the richest men in America. Lee knew this and had to treat him with respect. "Stop trying to suck up to me. I'm here to watch a talent show," Justin said rudely to Lee. "Why is that stopped? What's going on, and what's happening in the lake?" Lee replied, We were in the middle of a talent show when this woman poisoned my dog. I'm letting my dog bite her. Then we'll see if she dares to do something like that again." Lee pointed at Debbie, who was still struggling in the water. Justin hugged the 4 girls beside him and looked over at the artificial lake. Amidst the splashes, he could make out a dog crazily attacking a woman. It was impossible to see the woman's face. He nodded in approval and said, "I have an African lion at home. If anyone tried to poison my lion, I would let him eat him. These kinds of people deserve to die." Just then the dog in the water jumped toward the woman's neck, and Justin got a clear view of her face. He was shocked. He recognized her as the same woman he had met on Harmony Island. It was his half-brother's girlfriend, Debbie. "Stop him. Stop. I know her. Stop your crazy dog now." Justin ran full pelt into the artificial lake. Episode 94, All About Duke. Justin was wearing a pair of shorts, and he ran like Donald Duck, but he was determined to help Debbie. When he had met her on Harmony Island, he had really liked her. If it wasn't for the fact that Debbie was his brother's girlfriend, he would have tried to persuade her to date him. Angelina, who was standing beside Lee, didn't understand what was going on, but she guessed that it was some sort of emergency for Justin to be running flat out into the lake. She whistled and waved at Duke in the water. "Here, boy, come back to Mommy." Duke had been raised by Angelina. The moment she called him, she stopped attacking Debbie and ran onto the shore. He rushed over to her. "You crazy dog," shouted Justin. As Duke passed him, he managed to kick him hard in the side. Duke was about to attack Justin, but Angelina pulled him away. Debbie, who was still in the artificial lake, had lost all her strength. She was in severe pain, and there were several bite wounds on her body. She was floating in the water, too weak to save herself. She was losing all sense of what was happening, and was starting to dip in and out of consciousness. Her only clear sensation was pain. The only thing she knew was that she wanted to get away from the pain as quickly as possible. She was ready to die. Even if she had some stamina left to stay alive, she had lost the will. She didn't hear Justin running toward her, shouting, "Debbie, hang on, I'm coming!" She fell backward under the water, and the world went completely quiet. As her body sank, she felt the diamond necklace around her neck floating up with the waves to her face. She wanted to touch the diamonds, but she didn't have the strength. As her eyes focused on the necklace, she remembered the day that Alex had given it to her. The memory of Alex placing the necklace around her neck appeared before her eyes. She remembered the moment when Alex had kissed her in front of everyone. That kiss was so sweet. Debbie had no idea that at that moment, in New York, Alex was lying drunk on the dining table as he had lost all control of his body. He was very happy with his friends, and a stupid smile was plastered on his flushed face. She didn't have the energy to think about Alex anymore, and the image of him disappeared from her mind. She was fading away. But then the words that Alex once said began appearing in her mind, one by one, as she was dying. "Don't worry, I'll make everyone pay. Just tell me who hurt you. I'll look after you, and I'll protect you from all of them. It's all right. As long as I'm here, I promise I won't let you get hurt, even if I get injured protecting you. Don't worry." She thought, "Alex, although you didn't do what you said, I don't blame you at all. I'm sorry. I left before I could say goodbye to you. If I could hold on, I wouldn't give up, but it hurts too much. I'm sorry. Take care of yourself, Alex." Debbie closed her eyes. Her body gradually sank to the bottom of the lake. She was finally free. "Debbie!" Justin shouted in panic as he ran into the lake. He dived into the water and dragged Debbie to the surface, losing his shorts in the process. "Debbie, are you okay? Debbie!" Justin was standing in the water and shouting at her, but her face was pale and she didn't move at all. He was frightened and shouted over to the ambulance. "Get over here and help me! Come over here, quick!" Justin dragged her body toward the shore as the two paramedics rushed over to them with a stretcher. They managed to get her on the stretcher. Luckily, Debbie was still breathing. Justin shouted at the paramedics, "Hurry up and get her to the hospital. If anything happens to her, I will destroy your families. Now go!" The paramedics quickly loaded Debbie into the ambulance and headed to the hospital with the sirens screaming and the lights flashing. Justin took out his phone and called Alex with a frown. He knew that he had to let him know what had happened to Debbie. His eyes filled with worry as he placed his phone to his ear. Lying on the table, drunk, Alex didn't notice his phone blinking, ringing and shaking. "Damn it, what the hell are you doing?" Justin tried calling 3 times, but he couldn't get through. In a fit of anger, he threw his phone into the lake and said, "Damn it." He looked at the others with a cold gaze and walked toward the crowd in his bare feet. As he walked, he pointed at Lee and cursed. "You have a nerve. How dare you touch my brother's girlfriend?" He went over to Lee and slapped him on the face. Everyone gasped. They had renewed respect for Justin, having the courage to slap someone like Lee. Lee pleaded, "Justin, please calm down. It was this woman who poisoned my dog. It was because I was so angry that I wanted to punish her. Anyway, I didn't know she was Alex's girlfriend." After being slapped, Lee didn't feel pain or even shame. He felt fear. He wanted to calm Justin down as quickly as he could. Justin listened, then spat on Lee's face. After staying with Debbie on Harmony Island for 10 days, he was a little in love with her. He couldn't understand how Lee couldn't see what she was really like. "Do you really believe that Debbie poisoned your dog? Don't you realize that she can't even bear to pick a single flower? Do you think someone like that could harm your dog?" With Justin's mind made up about the situation, Lee knew that saying anything more would only make him angrier. He pointed at Charlie and Melissa and said, "They told me that my dog got sick because he drank her mineral water." "You all." Justin looked coldly at Charlie and Melissa and slowly walked toward them. Charlie was so scared that he looked like he had aged instantly. He stuttered, "Justin, that's not what happened." His face was creased and his lips were trembling. Saliva and mucus were flowing down his face, and his legs were shaking badly. Just as Justin approached to slap his face, Charlie's legs collapsed beneath him, and he dropped to the ground. Kneeling on the ground in front of Justin, he continued to beg, "Justin, it wasn't me. It was her. It was Melissa who made me frame Alex's girlfriend, and she was the one who gave her that bottle of water. She spiked the water with the drugs, causing Debbie's stomachache." Without hesitation, Charlie tried to put all the blame onto Melissa. He made it very clear that he was not responsible for any of it. "You piece of crap," Justin said as he kicked Charlie's head. Luckily, his feet were still bare, so he didn't do too much damage. He turned to Melissa, shouting, "Damn it! How dare you spike Debbie's water? I'll kick you to death." He grabbed her hair and slapped her face 10 times. When he let go of her, Melissa's body went limp, and she also fell onto the ground. "Stop pretending you're hurt. Get up!" Justin cursed at Melissa. Then he turned to the 4 girls he was with and said, "Go into the lake and find my shorts." Soon someone brought Justin his shorts. He continued to shout at Melissa, who was lying on the ground, "Stand up. Now bend over with your hands on your knees." Melissa was too terrified to disobey him. She stood up and bent over, sticking her butt out. "You stupid bitch. How dare you plot against Debbie? Why are you so vicious?" Justin continued to curse at her as he stepped forward and started spanking Melissa's butt hard with his shorts. With every spank, she screamed miserably. "Go on, cry," he laughed. Only after a total of 30 spanks did Justin stop hitting her. He threw his shorts on the ground, put them on, and walked towards Duke. Melissa closed her eyes and fell to the ground. Seeing Justin approaching, Duke threw himself forward, barking wildly. "Woof, woof, 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 woof." He remembered vividly how Justin had just kicked him. "Duke, calm down." Angelina scratched his head and smiled awkwardly at Justin. "What are you going to do?" she asked him as she pulled the dog behind her with the leash. Justin ignored her. His gaze was fixed on Duke. "Bring me a pair of pliers," Justin roared. Although none of his actual servants was there, no one wanted to disobey him. Lee immediately had the staff find a pair of pliers and personally handed them over to Justin. The only thing on his mind was quelling Justin's anger toward him. Angelina shouted angrily at Lee. "Lee, how could you?" She was furious with him. Not only did he not stick up for her and Duke, but he had become Justin's accomplice. Justin had already walked up to her. She shouted at him anxiously, "Go away!" "Shut up!" Justin snatched the leash from Angelina's hands and kicked her to the ground. "Woof, woof, woof!" Duke barked crazily at Justin, still trying to bite him. "This dog's even more dangerous than I thought." Justin had the advantage of the dog leash, so it was easy for him to dodge the dog's attack. Instead, he managed to use his height from above to kick him a few times. As he saw Duke leap toward him, he immediately wrapped his arms around his neck and threw him to the ground. The man and the dog rolled on the grass. Justin managed to get on top of Duke, and then he really had the advantage. "Woof woof." Duke was howling in fear. Justin reacted by punching him right in the nose. He said, "Shut up, dog." He hit Duke a few times to shut him up. Finally, Duke didn't dare to cry out anymore. He just closed his mouth and let out a low whimper. "Stupid dog." Justin punched Duke again, causing the dog to open his mouth in pain. He seized the opportunity and shoved the pliers into his mouth with his right hand. "You dare to bite my brother's girlfriend? You'll be sorry. I'm going to pull out all your teeth." He used his hand to keep Duke's mouth open. He clamped the pliers tightly onto one of his longest canine teeth and pulled it out. "I'm not finished yet," Justin said as he once again opened Duke's mouth with a punch. His pliers clamped onto another tooth and he pulled it out. "Open up. There's a good boy." Episode 95, It's Not Your Baby. By the time Justin let go of Duke, he had pulled out 5 or 6 of his teeth, which were now lying on the ground. Duke had lost all his bravado and was now terrified of Justin. He jumped up from the ground and ran toward Angelina with his tail between his legs. "Get out of my way!" Angelina shouted and rushed over to her dog. She had wanted to rush over and save him when Justin had been pulling Duke's teeth out, but Lee had stopped her. Now, she pushed him away and squatted down to look at Duke, whose head was starting to swell from being hit. When she opened his mouth, she could see that it was filled with blood and that a few of his teeth were missing. "Justin!" Angelina had raised Duke. She loved him and was furious with Justin when she saw what he had done. "Look what you've done!" she shouted at him as he walked toward her. He wanted to settle things with Angelina, but before he could say anything, she screamed at him. "I'm going to kill you!" Angelina rushed toward Justin, waving her fists at him. "Just get lost," he said as he grabbed her hair and threw her to the ground. "Woof, woof." Duke saw that his mistress was hurt, so he barked twice. Justin looked at him, and Duke shut his mouth obediently, putting his head down submissively. "One look at this smelly dog and I can tell that its mistress is not a good person." Justin cursed at Angelina and was about to kick her. Angelina glared at him and said in a high-pitched voice, "Justin, you mustn't kick me." "Really? Why not?" Justin was still angry, but he was starting to calm down. He was no longer as hot-headed, and was so interested to hear why Angelina thought he shouldn't hit her. "Because I'm pregnant." Angelina stood up from the ground. Hearing her words, Lee was stupefied. He had been using protective measures all along, so how could Angelina be pregnant? He sputtered, "Angelina, you—" "Tut-tut," Justin didn't care. "So what if you're pregnant?" he replied. He had never been a merciful person. "Justin, you still want to hurt me? Then you need to know that the child I'm carrying isn't Lee's. It's the child of Guy Avery, Sir Fred Avery's son." When she said this, everyone gasped in shock. "Whoa, Angelina's having another man's baby. What a bitch," one man said in disgust. Another replied, "Guy and Chuck Avery are the sons of Sir Fred Avery, one of the richest men in the world. I don't understand how Angelina managed to meet them." His friend agreed. "I knew it must be someone powerful if they dared to cheat with Lee Dempsey's girlfriend. I couldn't think of anyone powerful enough in Chicago, but it turns out to be young Guy Avery. Lee has no power at all compared to him." The chatter continued. "I've heard that last month, Guy Avery spent a week in Hollywood. He's friends with one of the great directors, I think Clint Eastwood. He stayed there for a week, and apparently during that time, more than 10 female Hollywood celebrities were seen going in and out of his hotel room. No one knows what they were doing." "Angelina, you—" Lee stuttered. His face was red and his voice was angry. His eyes were slightly trembling. Angelina glared at him and came straight to the point. She said calmly, "Well, my plan was to be tactful and let you down gently. But today you were such a coward with Justin. I realized that you clearly can't protect me. So why should I care about not embarrassing you? It's over." "Lee, you bitch." Lee raised his hand angrily. Angelina egged him on. "Go on then. Try touching me if you really have the balls." Lee clenched his fists, but after a moment thought better of it and lowered them. He knew that his family was no match for the Averys. Plus, Angelina was already pregnant with Guy Avery's child, so he absolutely couldn't touch her. "I knew it. Useless trash." Angelina proudly glared at Lee, then looked at Justin. She said, "Justin, I've investigated your family. Although the Ambrose family is very famous in New York and among the whole country's upper-class society, as far as I know, your family's Warrior Enterprises can't compare to the Dempsey family business. What I don't understand is, why is your reputation so much greater than Lee's?" Justin's branch of the family was only involved with a few of the Ambrose family business enterprise, but it was clear why his family was so prestigious. Famous people like Ken Stokes were involved in the enterprise, running the East Coast division of the company. Ken had a huge influence in New York. As long as the Ambrose business enterprises had such well-respected and influential people working for them, the kudos would always rub off on Justin's side of the family, too. Angelina asked, "Is it that your family are poor relations of the Ambrose family, but you've managed to build them into something respectable on social media?" She had heard that this was quite common now. There were plenty of examples of hoodlums from the ghettos in Chicago who had used social media to talk themselves into riches and respectability. Some were even starting charities to build their own reputations and become famous. Angelina continued, "I think your family is just like that. In reality, you have no power or wealth, so what gives you the right to look down on me?" The more she spoke, the more she knew she was right. And now she had Guy Avery supporting her. She had nothing to fear from Justin. "I know I'm right," she said, "but I really can't recall what kind of business is Warrior Enterprises? At least Lee has his own restaurant chain with delicious food and his live broadcast channels. Justin, you just seem to party and chase women." Onlookers heard what Angelina was saying and voiced their own opinions. One said, "Damn, I think Angelina's right. In fact, I'm not even sure that Warrior Enterprises is that successful. In fact, I don't think it's even ranked in the top 10 companies in Chicago." "Do you think Justin is afraid of Guy Avery?" asked his wife. He replied knowledgeably, "One is a mouse and the other is the son of the richest man in America. If Guy Avery wants to harm Justin, I can't see anything stopping him." All their friends agreed. Angelina continued arrogantly, "Justin, I know I'm right. And remember what you did. You actually pulled out Duke's teeth. If you don't want Guy to know about this, then kneel down and apologize to me immediately." Feeling that Guy would support her, she felt very confident. Justin smiled and slowly bent down. In a sarcastic voice, he said, "Oh, of course. Let me kneel down and apologize to you. Sure, no problem." Angelina laughed abruptly. "Ugh, you still want to fight with me? Go on, kneel down in front of me right now." She was waiting for a response from Justin, when all of a sudden, Angelina felt the world spinning around her. She realized that she was being carried on Justin's shoulder. "Put me down!" she shouted. The corner of Justin's mouth hooked up into a carefree smile. He spun on the spot and whirled Angelina around. She was screaming as she started feeling dizzy and shaken. Finally, Justin stopped. Angelina continued to shout, "Justin, put me down! I'm going to tell Guy all about this. You're in so much trouble." "If you want to sue me, go ahead," Justin replied. He wasn't worried about Guy Avery at all. As he spoke, he raised Angelina high up in the air with his two thick arms. "Justin, what are you doing? I'm warning you. Remember, I'm still carrying Guy Avery's child. If anything happens to me, he'll kill you," Angelina was shouting. Justin ignored her and threw her up into the air. Bang! Angelina fell from a height of 2 meters onto the ground. A few of her ribs were broken, She was twisting on the ground, crying out loudly in pain. She was in agony. Justin decided that he was wasting his time with these people. He wanted to get to the hospital, but first, he needed to make sure that no one else was going to try to frame Debbie for anything. At this moment, Rita and Janice walked up to him. They were very worried about Debbie's safety. Rita said, "Justin, I'm Debbie's friend." Janice said, "I'm Debbie's manager. We want to go with you to the hospital to see her." "Okay," Justin agreed. Then, seeing that Katie, Olivia, Melissa, and Rita were all wearing the same costumes, he asked Rita, "Did they want to go too?" She nodded. Katie, Olivia, and Melissa were pale with anxiety. They lowered their heads and hardly dared to breathe. They were afraid that Rita would say something about how they had bullied Debbie. "Okay, we'll go together." Justin glared at Melissa. He thought, "Damn, this was the girl that framed Debbie. But I've already punished her." They took 2 cars to the Chicago General Hospital. When they got there, they spoke to Debbie's doctor, who told them that she had received painkillers and she was no longer in pain. Her bite wounds had been bandaged, and she had been given a rabies vaccination. Fortunately, her injuries were all minor. She hadn't been as badly injured as Justin had feared. She had also been given a sedative and she was sleeping. Justin and the others sat with her quietly for 10 minutes before being told to leave by Justin. He then sat beside her bed, quietly waiting for her to wake up. The next morning, when Debbie slowly opened her eyes, she was still in a bit of a daze. She wondered, "Am I dead?" Then she noticed a man sleeping in a chair beside her bed. A few minutes later, Justin woke up. Seeing that she had woken up, he became excited. "Debbie, you're awake. That's wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Justin?" Debbie was a little confused. She didn't know why he was here. "Yes, it's me," he replied. Then he told her about how he had gone to the talent show the previous day and how she had been bitten by the dog. He continued, "Debbie, don't worry. Last night I beat up everyone who bullied you. As for your teammate Melissa, that girl really deserves to die." Debbie nodded slightly. Her heart was filled with gratitude toward Justin. If it wasn't for him, she was sure she would be dead. A few minutes later, a beautiful girl walked into the room and said, "Hello, Debbie." Then she turned to Justin and said, "Justin, the helicopter has arrived. We should fly to Washington now if we want to get there on time." Justin was supposed to attend a music contest in Washington that day. He had invited more than 10 popular singers from the entertainment industry to perform. He had already arranged to meet one of the female singers in a hotel room in Washington, and if they were late, they might forfeit their chances of winning. It was imperative that they get there on time. "You fly out there now. I need to stay in Chicago with Debbie." Although he said that he would stay, he wasn't completely sure that it was the right decision. The singer he had arranged to meet was a real stunner. Debbie looked at him. "You should go," she said with a smile. It was clear to her that Justin wanted to go. But nothing," she said assuredly. "I feel fine now. I'm not in pain. I just have a few small wounds from a dog's bite. It's nothing serious." "Okay. You rest well in the hospital. Why don't you call Alex and get him to come to Chicago to keep you company? And when you see him, give him a piece of my mind for not being here for you." His words made Debbie laugh. Justin stood up and walked outside. He spotted Melissa and shouted at her, "Take good care of her. If anything happens to her, I will blame you. Do you hear me?" I heard you," Melissa replied timidly. Then Justin said goodbye to Debbie and left.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.